Ahla wa sahla, welcome. Thank you for coming in such a big number to the launch of our new study, the book Economic Impact of the Syrian Crisis on Lebanon. Ever since that Syrian crisis has started, and we have been victim in this country with a mass hysteria concerning the number of refugees, concerning the economic impact, concerning everything that has to do with the Syrian crisis. Also, we have used the Syrian crisis as the cause for every problem we have in this country, even if these problems are 10, 20, 30, 40, or 50 years old. That doesn't mean that the Syrian crisis did not come with its own problems, mostly exacerbating existing problems. So we decided to put in a compendium all the research that has been undertaken, whether by international organizations, civil society organizations, or our own research firm, InfoPro, in a way that is accessible to the public at large and to the business community in particular. There are a lot of studies that have been made, especially by the international organizations, that are deep, that are thoughtful, that are empirical, but that unfortunately circulate only in small circles, and unless you really look for it, it's hard to find it. This is why this book, this is why this forum today, and this is why we're going to do our utmost to propagate this book in order for it to fall in the hands of the largest number of people. And we have, when preparing for this book, we have faced many issues that have to do with information and data. For example, when we started, we asked ourselves, how many Syrian refugees are there in Lebanon? And it looks like an auction by Christie's. The United Nations have estimated the number at 1 million or a little bit less. Our government, depending who you talk to, will tell you 1.2 million or 1.5 million. Our foreign minister last night said that the number of Syrian refugees constitute half the population in Lebanon, which means we're starting at least with 2 million. Not counting for the very excited people who appear on talk shows who tell you 2.5 or 3 million. I'm giving this example, one, to lighten up the mood a little bit, but also to show you how serious the issue is of numbers, because if we cannot agree on the number of people, which should be a fairly easy matter to estimate, how are we going to tackle the more difficult numbers? I tell you, with the InfoPro, we've been for 7 years doing field studies with Syrian refugees, working with a large number of international organizations, and we are not convinced that there are 3 million Syrian refugees, or 2 million, or even 1 million. We haven't seen them physically. I mean, you have to see them. We haven't seen them in the consumption of utilities. We haven't seen them in the production of human waste. We haven't seen them in their economic input. We haven't seen 1 million people. Now, I'm not going to advance a number because then I'll be entering the auction. But even if we had half this number or a quarter of this number, it is still a huge problem for Lebanon. It's a huge problem of Lebanon, even if we had only 100,000 Syrian refugees, and that's not the number that I'm suggesting. The actual number is much bigger, of course. But even if we had only 100,000 Syrian refugees, that would be a huge problem for Lebanon. So the program for this afternoon, I'm going to ask my colleague Jennifer Abu Murad, who has put in the biggest chunk of work in this project and has done a lot of the research herself, along with all our team at InfoPro. And she will give you an executive summary of the book and the main findings. And then we will form a panel to discuss the issues of these findings, starting with my friend Mr. Charles Arbid, the chairman of the Social Economic Council. I'm very happy that he accepted to be with us, especially that his council is the receptacle of all agendas, all economic agendas of businesses, of labor, of civil society, of the whole spectrum of the economy. So who better than him to synthesize all the worries of the economy, especially when it comes to such a big issue as the Syrian crisis. And the Syrian crisis, not just Syrian refugees. We also have invited Madame Mireille Girard, the head of the UNHCR in Lebanon. And for those who haven't been following the news lately, ask your neighbor. But she has decided to delegate her very able Monsieur Emmanuel Gignac, who also has a lot of experience with refugees from Libya to Pakistan to other countries. And he is very well placed to discuss this issue with us. So we welcome you. And one word about UNHCR. Between brackets, and it's the only time we will discuss this part of the UNHCR this afternoon. Camille, خليك معنا. UNHCR, the last letter in UNHCR is refugees. And UNHCR has done a lot for refugees all over the world. And UNHCR has done a lot of refugees in Lebanon. And they are welcome in Lebanon. They're doing a great job in Lebanon. They have helped us in Lebanon deal with a lot of matters that have to do with our economy. And it is a shame that the issue of UNHCR is being debated publicly in this manner. You are welcome in Lebanon. You have a visa from the Lebanese people to stay here and to work here. And we should not politicize the work that you are doing. And if it so happens that you become also refugees in this country, we will treat you very well. Also on the panel is my good friend Haneen Al-Sayed from the World Bank, who oversees a lot of issues that have to do with the Syrian crisis impact on the Lebanese economy. And she is well versed in many, many portfolios. And we also have on the panel Mr. Gilbert Doumit. Mr. Gilbert Doumit and his consultancy firm are not just pontificators that analyzes the situation in air-conditioned offices. They deal with the micro situation They are on the ground, in the field. They look at the host communities, then they look at the macro issue as well. So we invited him to also share with us his perspective. So we will start with Jennifer, and then we'll have our panel discussion, and thank you very much.
Good afternoon. So today we're going to, as Ramzi indicated, we're going to discuss the economic impact of the Syrian crisis on Lebanon publication and our main findings. Basically, the methodology we utilized for this publication relied on us reviewing more than 100 publications and studies and reports undertaken on the Syrian crisis. We relied on, of course, the Lebanon crisis response plans. We relied on UNHCR reports, UNICEF reports, the UNHCR website, publications by the World Bank, ILO, UNDP, among others. Of course, also to portray the situation prior to the Syrian crisis, we relied on official reports by the Central Administration for Statistics, among others, and of course, we relied on official ministry reports and publications. We also resorted to surveys undertaken by InfoPro throughout the duration of the Syrian crisis between 2011 and 2017, which helped us at times clarify certain issues and fill in some gaps. And of course, in some cases, we had to resort to simulations. Where there was lack of data, we did our own simulations to reach conclusions as to the economic impact of the Syrian crisis on certain sectors. The strategy of the book, as you will notice, is the situation. We compared the situation pre the Syrian crisis versus the situation post the Syrian crisis. Of course, as we all know, the Syrian crisis did definitely create a huge impact on Lebanon's economy, whether direct or indirect. So in some situations, it was a direct impact of the Syrian crisis itself. In other situations, it was a result of an indirect impact. For example, the closure of the borders, of course, impacted certain sectors such as tourism. It impacted trade. The tensions between Lebanon and the Gulf countries as a result of the Syrian crisis, of course, played an indirect role in impacting the economy. So we felt that this would be the best way of portraying the actual situation. The summary of economic impact, okay, basically, as you can notice here, real estate sector and tourism sector were the most impacted as a result of the crisis. Simulations conducted by InfoPro show that the economic losses that were incurred, for example, were in the form of, with regards to tourism, we lost approximately a potential of 2.7 million visitors between 2011 and 2017. For real estate, the potential losses were approximately of 132,000 unsold properties for that duration also. With regards to health and education, losses were approximately at $3.3 billion. For infrastructure, it was approximately losses of $3 billion for the duration of the Syrian crisis. All in all, the gross economic losses as a result of the Syrian crisis is $19.5 billion. However, we have to take into account, okay, the aid that Lebanon received as a result of the crisis. Of course, excluding the Brussels II, we have received approximately $6 billion throughout the crisis itself. And studies conducted by UNHCR, among others, have shown that there's a multiplier effect of 1.6, which implies that for every $1 received by Lebanon, every $1 is approximately $1.6. So that means that the aid we received is approximately $9.7 can be translated to $9.7 billion. So our net economic losses as a result of the crisis is $9.7 billion. The Syrian refugees in numbers, what do they look like? Okay, as Ramzi was indicating, figures show that there are 1 to 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Of course, there are no credible sources to verify this figure. And these refugees, 55% of them are below the age of 18 and are mainly children and women. Most of them reside in host communities, with approximately 60% residing in North Lebanon and the Bekaa. The Syrian refugees, we have a workforce of 384,000. Their workforce consists of 384,000. And according to ILO figures, the unemployment rate of Syrian refugee workforce is approximately 36%. The education level of the primary household, of the main income earner in a household, is at most an intermediate level of education for 2/3 of them. Okay, so how did the crisis affect Lebanon's economy? Of course, Lebanon's economy started retracting as a result of the crisis. And we'll notice here that prior to the crisis, the GDP growth was at 9%. Okay, and it hit its lowest in 2012 at 0.9, and currently it's been hovering for the past couple of years between 1.5 to 2%. Consumer confidence, of course, fluctuated as a result of the crisis and hit its lowest in 2013. And has been recovering. In 2016, it received a boost as a result of the election of the president, but it still has not reached pre-crisis levels. Foreign direct investment was greatly reduced as a result of the crisis itself, and this was mainly due to the slowdown of the real estate sector. And of course, there was an increase in gross public debt, but this was a trend prior to the crisis. Already Lebanon, this was an ongoing trend prior to the crisis itself. Of course, the growth rate has increased as a result of the Syrian crisis itself. Impact on employment. As we stated, we have an additional labor force of 384,000 Syrian refugees, which has basically increased Lebanon's labor market by 31%. Most of them are unskilled, semi-skilled, and as we stated earlier, with a low educational level. So here, from different sources and different studies, basically results show that most Syrian refugees work in the informal sector, and of course this is also due to their legal status, which limits them to that sector, to the informal sectors in specific. At the start of the crisis, the Syrian workforce was mainly employed in construction, agriculture sector, which was the case even prior to the crisis. However, as time went by and as the number of Syrian refugees increased in Lebanon, they started working in different sectors. So they started expanding to different sectors. In 2013, one-fourth approximately of the Syrian workforce was working in the services sector. So in 2014, the government took measures to limit their employment to only 3 sectors, which are agriculture, construction, and environment, and specifically cleaning and sanitation. This, of course, did help to limit their employment. However, current figures, Infopro surveys, in addition to the Vasir 2017 survey, does show that we have 50 to 60% currently working in construction and agriculture. However, the remaining, we have 15% in the services sector, we have 12% working in retail shops. So of course, they're not just limited to construction and agriculture. There's a lack of exact figures as to how many of the Syrian refugees, how much of the Lebanese workforce that they replace. There's a lack of exact figures as to this exact number, and no studies have been conducted. But we can infer from the different studies that have been conducted and from our own analysis that, of course, competition is at the low end of the spectrum. We're looking, competition is basically for low-skilled jobs, low-paid jobs. So basically, Syrian refugees are competing with Lebanese who are of a low-skill level, okay? And definitely, with regards to whether they've replaced Lebanese nationals in certain sectors, of course, we can say that they've probably replaced Lebanese nationals in the services sector, which employs the largest number of Lebanese nationals. And of course, recent studies have shown that there has been a replacement of Lebanese employees to replace them with Syrians in the construction sector. An ILO study was recently conducted for North Lebanon. Okay, so definitely, and of course, the trade and manufacturing, but to a lower extent. Of course, such a huge number, 384,000 is a huge number, and definitely this has had an impact on wages. As we all know, Syrian refugees do accept lower wages than Lebanese nationals, and our studies have shown that actually the average monthly income of a Syrian household is approximately $400 in comparison to the household income of a Lebanese who is $1,200. And this is corroborated by UNDP and UNHCR studies, which show that Syrian refugees are willing to accept 65% less wages than Lebanese nationals. Of course, local businesses have profited from the fact that Syrian refugees tend to accept lower wages, and this, of course, have increased their profits, of course, within the sectors that employ a large number of Syrian refugees. Unemployment at the eve of the crisis, okay, prior to the crisis was at 9%, and IMF and World Bank figures currently place it between 18 to 20%. So we can say that unemployment has almost doubled, and studies do indicate that unemployment is, of course, at the highest among youth at approximately 34%, and this is normal, taking into account, as we said, so basically the competition is over low-skilled jobs, and youth tend to be the ones who are just graduating without the skills required. Of course, the unemployment rate can also be attributed to the fact that when students are graduating from universities, they're also not finding employment opportunities because Lebanon has basically been creating a lot of low productivity jobs, so that could be another explanation. And mitigation measures, of course, there is a need to promote internship programs and their conversion to full-time jobs. And this here we're talking about, of course, for Syrian youth and for vulnerable Lebanese youth, because, of course, unemployment tends to lead to negative coping mechanisms which are not positive for the Syrian refugees themselves or the Lebanese communities that are where Syrian refugees are residing. We need to promote technical and vocational education. We need to identify opportunities or niche markets where we can utilize the skills of the Syrian refugees without impacting Lebanese nationals, and provide microfinance opportunities to micro and small enterprises which might be able to create more opportunities for Syrian refugees, vulnerable Lebanese. Of course, we're taking into account that the Syrian refugees are going to be in Lebanon for the short to medium term. So we have to create solutions and not just expect that they are going to leave tomorrow. And we need to develop a wage policy for Syrian nationals which places them at an equal footing with Lebanese nationals. So it wouldn't really be that easy for Lebanese employers to just replace a Lebanese national with a Syrian refugee. With regards to trade, if we're looking at exports, it's a mixed picture. okay, there has been a drop in exports. But this drop in exports is mainly due not to the Lebanese crisis. If we look at the different categories where there has been a drop in export, we notice that most of it is for categories such as pearls, precious stones, basic metals. So this is basically due to international fluctuations in demand rather than the Syrian crisis itself. There has been a drop in the closure of borders did, of course, create a dilemma for exporters. However, exporters were able to start shipping instead of utilizing the land routes through air and through sea. Of course, this did increase transportation costs. Okay, the government is providing subsidies. However, of course, exporters are still paying almost double what they were paying before. The Syrian crisis also, at the same time, did create alternative markets. Due to the disruption in the productive capacity of the Syrian manufacturers, of course, this caused a replacement effect, whereby Lebanese exporters, manufacturers, have also been able to replace Syrian production in certain markets. And, of course, exports to Syria have increased, of course, for certain basic products such as food, textile, and so on. Imports have been stable. There has been an increase in imports of foodstuff, vegetable products, livestock, and textile. And this increase has been approximately, I think it's a 13% increase. This, of course, is due to the Syrian refugees themselves, to the increased number in our population. A mitigation measure: the government needs to continue subsidizing the export of goods. And of course, the government needs to, we need to assist firms dependent on the Syrian and Middle East markets to tap other potential markets. This is, of course, happening, but this needs to keep on happening. The banking sector has been resilient throughout the crisis. Of course, deposits have shown a 50% increase. However, growth rates have been lower than the pre-crisis levels. Profits, there have been a slight dip in profits due to losses of banks with subsidiaries operating in Syria. Those operating in Syria, it's been estimated that between 2011 and 2016, they've lost approximately $635 million. And of course, the banks have had to limit their relationship with Syrian clients due to international sanctions imposed, and this, of course, did hinder profits, the profits of the banking sector. The tourism sector. Prior to the crisis, the tourism sector in 2010 was having one of its best years, with approximately 2.2 tourists coming to Lebanon in 2010. As a result of the Syrian crisis, this number went down by 24%. And of course, and kept on going down until in 2013 it was at 1.2 million visitors. Currently it's been recovering, and figures show that in 2017 we had 1.9 million visitors coming to Lebanon. Of course, the drop in tourist arrivals did affect occupancy rates and room rates. Occupancy rates prior to the crisis were at 68%. In 2015 they were at 51%, and now they're at 64%, so they've been recovering. Room rates prior to the crisis were approximately at, I think it was at $275, the room rate, and they reached, now currently they're at $150. The drop in tourism, okay, the problem is there was a shift in demographics. The Syrian crisis caused closures, the closure of the borders, which in fact affected tourists which used to come to Lebanon by car. And of course, the political tension between Lebanon and the Gulf countries also impacted Arab tourists who used to come to Lebanon. And there was a decrease. If we're looking specifically at Saudi Arabians, Kuwaitis, nationals from UAE and Jordan, there was a 50% decrease in tourist arrivals between 2011 and 2017. And these are the biggest spenders. So this definitely did impact tourist spending. And we can see that the direct contribution to GDP, which was 10% in 2010, went down to 6.5 in 2016. Okay, the mitigation measures, of course, here we have to take into account, and this I need to explain, when we're looking at mitigation measures, it's a compilation of the mitigation measures which we've compiled through many sources, and of course some of it is our own analysis. Here we need to, of course, for the tourism sector, promote Lebanon as a destination for non-Arab tourists. So we should work on cultural tourism, religious tourism, we should work on the accreditation of 3-star, 4-star hotels, and of course on ecotourism and certain programs such as the Diafe program, which is working on ecotourism in Lebanon. Of course, we also need to promote Lebanon as a destination for healthcare and wellness. The real estate sector. The real estate sector was enjoying solid growth between 2007 and 2011. As a result of the Syrian crisis, the Syrian crisis basically caused foreigners to shy away. Okay, and as we did indicate, it impacted the sector negatively with huge losses, and results do show that when we're looking at construction permits, for example, that construction permits dropped between 2011 and 2015. They dropped by 23% and are currently recovering. Sales transactions have dropped by 30% between 2011 and 2017 and are still down. Okay, demand has decreased due, of course, to the diaspora and foreigners shying away from the local market and adopting a wait-and-see attitude due to the political crisis and to the instability of the crisis itself. At the beginning of the crisis, a lot of the Syrians who came to Lebanon were the wealthy Syrian refugees, and they started investing in Lebanon and purchasing real estate. And if we look at the actual, and in 2014, they actually replaced the Saudi Arabians as the largest foreign buyer of real estate. Throughout that period, if we look at the investments they've made between 2011 and 2017, we can see that they've invested approximately 715 million in the real estate sector. However, the Syrians that did follow after the wealthy refugees came, the Syrians that did follow were the poor. The poor refugees basically pushed demand within the rental market itself because they were renting low-end units with several families residing in one apartment at times. So they pushed demand within the rental market and they pushed prices up. Impact on prices. If we're looking at sales prices, we'll notice that, of course, the fact that the diaspora and the Gulf nationals have shied away from the local real estate market has meant that prices for large apartments has decreased, and prices in administrative Beirut specifically went down by 20% between 2011 and 2017, while rental rates have gone up by approximately 40%. And of course, when we're talking about rental rates going up by 40%. Here, of course, we're talking, as we said, about low-end units in areas like the north and the Bekaa. So basically, this is affecting Lebanon's most vulnerable populations. The health sector. The demand for health services as a result of such a huge influx of refugees has resulted in demand increasing by approximately 40%. Visits to public health centers have increased, if we compare 2009 to 2012, by 52%. And this has been on a rise, with figures showing that in 2014, there were approximately, the Syrian refugees made up 1/3 of those visits to public health centers. Referrals to hospitals have also increased in the past 3 years by 90%. This has created tension among Syrian refugees and host communities who have felt that the Syrian refugees are the ones who are being prioritized. And this has resulted in the Ministry of Public Health taking measures in a way to separate Syrian refugees from Lebanese nationals in hospitals and in public health centers to limit this tension. At the beginning of the crisis, there was a rise in epidemics, and everybody was worried about health problems that would arise. But the Ministry of Public Health was successful in limiting this issue. Of course, public hospitals have had a huge strain due to the Syrian crisis. The payment reductions which the Lebanese government, and basically Syrian refugees, the government has implemented a payment reduction system whereby they pay less than Lebanese nationals. So this payment reduction has caused a problem for public hospitals for example, with some public hospitals indicating that they've incurred losses ranging between 15 to 25%. The fact that the UNHCR coverage does not cover the full health bill of Syrian refugees, but rather the 75%, has also at times created problems whereby the Syrian refugees were at times not able to cover the rest of the bill. And this was, of course, a loss for the hospitals themselves. And certain exclusions of terminal illnesses was also a problem, whereby when a Syrian refugee went to a private hospital and he was terminally ill, they were referred to a public hospital who had to deal with that case and incur further losses. As a result of all of this, the Ministry of Public Health has incurred an increase in expenditure between 2011 and 2015 of 56%. Mitigation measure, there's a need to expand coverage of PHCs, create a fund for the treatment of chronic diseases and illnesses, provide public hospitals with the financial support needed to cover their losses, and increase the budget for healthcare expenditure. The education sector has also suffered as a result due to the large number of Syrian refugee children. In 2013, that number was at 300,000, and this number currently is at 487,000 Syrian refugee children between the age of 3 and 18. Okay, this has caused the MIHI, or the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, to initiate a second shift. And currently, Syrian refugee children make up approximately 50% of the student body at public schools. Such a large number of Syrian students has caused a dip in the enrollment rates of Lebanese students at public schools, due to the fact that Lebanese parents at times have felt that they don't want their children to be studying with Syrian refugee children, or due to the deteriorating quality of public education. But this was resolved. This was resolved, and figures have been recovering due to the fact that a second shift has been initiated by MIHI. The quality of education, definitely, such a large number of refugee children did affect the quality of education in Lebanon. The initiation of the second shift has resulted in an increase of 17% in contractual teachers, and these contractual teachers that were recruited for the second shift basically did not follow the normal recruitment processes, and different sources indicate that their level is they don't have, they're substandard to the normal. And they did not follow normal recruitment processes in their recruitment. Okay, the quality of education, of course, has been deteriorating also as a result of overcrowded classrooms. Teachers have had to deal with classrooms with a large number of students, and this has also created a problem. The lower education level of Syrian refugee students has at some points impacted the Lebanese students also, because sometimes teachers have to forego speaking in foreign languages because Syrian refugee students cannot understand. So this is basically impacting the quality of education for Lebanese students. Of course, such a large number, of course, impacted infrastructure also, with Mihi indicating that approximately 700 schools are in need of renovation, and that some schools need to be expanded because initiating a second shift is not enough. So there need for these schools to be expanded. However, this is not as easy as, it's not easily done, because end of the day, not all schools are government owned. Some of them are rented, and this is not possible. And of course, there has been a rise in the expenditure of Mihi in the past, during the Syrian crisis itself. The mitigation measures for schools, there's a need to increase the number of schools with a second shift, ensure the availability of a social worker within schools to handle some of the problems that are arising as a result of such a large number of students in certain in classrooms, provide financial support to schools in poor areas that host refugees, and of course renovate infrastructure. With regards to teachers, there's the need to undergo mandatory pedagogical training by teachers, and they need to be trained on classroom management practices and how to give remedial classes. Infrastructure. Okay, infrastructure, as we indicated at the beginning of the presentation, has incurred losses, approximately $3 billion losses in the past 7 years as a result of the Syrian crisis. For electricity, consumption has increased approximately by 25%. Already the capacities, already Lebanon was not meeting the capacity of Lebanese nationals prior to the crisis, so an increase in consumption of 25%, of course, added to the strain of the infrastructure and to the facilities. This, of course, caused, basically increased our reliance on private generation, which was already happening prior to the crisis, but this has increased as a result of the Syrian crisis. The Syrian refugees themselves have started illegally connecting to get electricity. All of this has strained our infrastructure, and the fact that we're relying more and more on private generation has increased toxic gas emissions by approximately 20% in cities such as Saida, Zahle, Alay, among others, which is creating an environmental problem. Okay, with regards to solid waste generation has approximately increased by 30%, okay, which has caused some facilities, and we were already facing a problem prior. So this has caused some facilities to reach full capacity, and of course is leading to more and more environmental issues and problems. Of course, the Syrian crisis and such a huge influx have had an impact on depletion in water resources. There's been an increase of 8 to 12% as a result of the Syrian crisis. There's been a deterioration of water quality, and of course, the fact that wastewater prior to the crisis did not have the facilities, only 10% were being treated, means the additional wastewater which is generated by Syrian refugees are, of course, not being treated either, which is exacerbating the existing pollution situation. Mitigation measures, okay, of course, there is a need, okay, okay. So basically, I think we're out of time, okay, so basically, we need to work on dealing with the infrastructure in areas that have a high refugee influx and prioritizing access to sustainable energy and energy efficient products which would limit the usage of our infrastructure with regards to electricity. And of course, there is a need to fast track the establishment of composting, separating, landfilling facilities in areas with a high refugee influx, close dumps in areas with a high refugee influx, and of course, train municipalities on proper methods of solid waste treatment, stop the burning of waste in open dumps. But all of these things were actually happening prior to the crisis. The crisis was actually like a cherry on top, so and has exacerbated these issues. Thank you so much for your time. I'm not going to go through. I think I have one more slide.
We will take questions after the panel, of course, but I would like to invite the panel members to join us now. Thank you, Jenny, for this comprehensive, and sorry for cutting you off, but really there is no end to issues that we have that have been exacerbated by the Syrian crisis. I'm going to ask our panelists first each to contribute a few thoughts on what they've heard for about 5 minutes each. And then we'll be asking them some questions, and then we'll give you also the opportunity to ask questions of Jennifer or of anybody else on the panel. And I would like to start with Mr. Arbid with your input, please.
Thank you, Ramzi, for inviting me. Of course, I come from a school where we learned that you cannot improve something you cannot measure. So thank you for these good figures. But having said that, I need to say that sometimes indicators are much more important than figures by themselves. I mean, if we have 1.2 million or 1.5 million refugees, as you call them, because I like to call them displaced, and this is something that has to do with the social aspect, but I think we will have the same impact on our economy and our social situation. Of course, our neighbor, the Syrians, with whom we have a relation for a long history, for me, as far as I'm concerned, these are displaced people, and we better call them like that, because the definition says someone will move from one place to another when probably, as a displaced, they might have security issues. But when we go to refugees, this is much, much more complicated because it implicates political approach, political aspect, and this might take us to a much longer situation in this field. I would like also to comment, because I prepared the speech, but I will save you this. I will keep the copy with you, Ramzi, and I will hope you will publish it later. But quickly, I have a few issues that I would like to comment on. First, that none of us at the beginning of this crisis thought that this crisis might last for 7 years now, and still to go. So the approach was a little bit ad hoc, and most of our political leaders approached this issue with very specific tools. But now that we are here, I think that I would like to comment also on some of the figures that came in the study and in the book, mainly two major aspects. First, unemployment. This is the most important thing because the competition between the Syrian people that are here, the Syrian laborers, mainly that we don't have exact figures on that, and what our Lebanese labor are suffering of. This is a story that we should start dealing with. We read many articles saying that industrialists in Lebanon, they are hiring Syrians. This is not very true. This is not true because I visit a lot of industries and I know that this is not a real problem that we're facing. Maybe in agriculture it can be the situation, but in industry this is not true because of the lack of good craftsmen and know-how in the Syrian people, with the Syrian laborers. So first we have to rectify that the issue is an economic issue, a demand issue from this side of the economy. The second point is electricity, and this is something that is very important for all of us. Yes, we have 25% more demand on electricity, but who is paying that? After all, we Lebanese people are paying, and electricity is the number one reform that we and our government should, once it's now hopefully soon will take place, we have to deal with this major issue. We don't have to wait to say that because we have 25% increase in electricity consumption that we have to rectify the tariff. This has nothing to do with the crisis. We cannot keep on selling electricity to Lebanese people for who are paying among Lebanese and giving electricity to displaced Syrians or other refugees in Lebanon without getting le juste prix, the right price. This is a big lesson that we have to take, that we have to start, and I know this is not popular, being the president of the Social and Economic Council. It's not easy, but don't expect politicians to have the courage to say we have to increase the electricity tariff as the first reform in our economy. So I would have loved to see you pointing out more on these two issues. Finally, we have to say on the tourism level, you said in one of your comments that we have to rely on other than Arabs. Okay, that's fair enough, but should we wait for the Syrian crisis to take this decision? Not necessarily. We have to open our mind, we have to look, we have a lot of friends everywhere in the world, but this has nothing to do with our friends. The issue is the stability in Lebanon, the country credibility in Lebanon actually. This is where we should put our bread and butter to be able to export more, to have more tourism, and we still need, as all of you know, we need a serious strategy, a vision, an economic vision. We need policies, we need strategies, and this is what a lot of people are working on. There is a serious work that's being done with this very complicated issue of Mackenzie, but I can tell you, wait for the study, it's coming, and it's a good, because I'm joining the team on that. We have good ideas coming on, but at the end, we need to take the decision as Lebanese that what is coming in the future has nothing to do with the past. We have to work on our productivity, we have to work on a lot of laws, mainly on the social aspect. It's good to have an investment program, a capital investment program like the one we had in Said, but we have to look also on the social aspect, and this is where we are putting our effort in the Social and Economic Council. I leave the floor to my other colleagues, and then we'll take maybe some questions just to interact. And thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Mr. Arbid. Haneen, you want to take over?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ramzi, and for inviting us to be here to have an opportunity to look at your publication and give some comments and discuss it. And thank you, Jennifer, for the very comprehensive presentation. So certainly I really congratulate you, because this is now the first comprehensive synopsis of all the assessments that have been done, and the studies and the surveys, and we recognize quite a few of them coming from the World Bank in your book. And it's actually very nicely presented with graphs and tables and figures. And in fact, my own 16-year-old daughter, as I had the book lying on the bed, next to my bed, took it and rummaged through it and said, "Oh wow, mommy, this looks like an interesting book."
Well, I'm happy you're sleeping with the book.
So, yeah. And then myself, of course, I have also, like InfoPro, in a way, been immersed in the deep aspects of the Syrian crisis and its impact on Lebanon and Jordan. We have been working with this from the beginning as a World Bank, although, of course, not from as much the beginning as UN agencies. In fact, in the first year and a half, there wasn't much role for the World Bank. You know, this was seen as you said, Charles, a temporary situation. And so ourselves as a development agency didn't really see much of a role for ourselves, but it was much more UNHCR and UN agencies that were active. But very soon in 2013, when the numbers were just increasing rapidly, the then government of Lebanon came and asked us, can you help us do an impact assessment? Can you help us do an assessment of what's going on? We know that there's something happening on our economy, on our social sectors. So we embarked on what is now called the Economic and Social Impact Assessment that we did with UN also and IMF in 2013. It was done over the summer in August and September and presented in late September at the UN General Assembly. What's interesting or relevant about that report is that's the first time that, in fact, we had this kind of analysis that looked at the impact on the host country, we don't call them host communities, it's the host country. What was its impact on all the sectors that you lay out there, whether it be on the macroeconomy, the fiscal, the trade, education, health, labor, what have you. And this is where you probably also heard that famous number of $7.5 billion economic loss. It comes from that number. This is the estimate of from 2012 to 2014. But we also looked, as I said, on labor markets and projected unemployment increases because of the large supply increase, again, which you talk about. So, so that was very much what we got busy with. And then, but the international community, and particularly the UN agencies, were really doing an incredible job in dealing with the situation, all the sectors. Bit by bit, strategies were started to put in place by the governments. The first one, of course, is the famous RACE, one in the education sector, which is a quite important event in and of itself, because it looked not just 1 year by 1 year, it looked at the next 3 years, the next 5 years. What are the needs in the education sector? What's going to be the impact? What are the needs? And this is very good, and this is what we've encouraged all the different ministries, with the fact is that we work with many of them, to do a similar thing, because this is, whether we like it or not, it's not a crisis that's going home, that's ending tomorrow. And even if the refugees were to go back tomorrow, Lebanon would still take some time in picking up. Of course, we highlight very much the initial pre-crisis structural issues that are in the economy, and in each sector that Jennifer mentioned, you have a long, list of that. So that's all important to keep an eye on. And what I guess, going back to maybe specifically the report or the book, where I saw some weakness is in the mitigation measure, or in the kind of analysis of the recommendations in mitigation. It had them, but they're just more of like a long list and hard to prioritize. And I understand what you did was to take from the different documents and so on, but obviously what's needed is to really see what are some of these high priority sectors like energy that need to be moved on. I just, again, also on the book specifically, again, I think it's really a very good contribution to where we are now, 7 years into the crisis. It is lacking kind of an analytical framework, to really understand why these changes happen in the economy. And of course, it's not easy, because you would have to distinguish the trade channels from the investment flow channels, from the refugee impact themselves. But I think this is where, to be able to make sound policy, we probably need to go. In this context, actually, the World Bank, we are now preparing to do an update of the ESIA, but a regional one. So this would also include Jordan and Iraq. And to be able to put it all together to sort of see how the whole region has been impacted by this. I want to very much agree that I think the biggest challenge going forward is going to be in the whole area of job creation and livelihood, or labor markets, whatever you want to call it. I think we have learned a lot how to respond to providing services like education for refugees and well as Lebanese, health services, municipal water, and so on. We kind of know how to do it, but of course it needs money. It needs continued and sustained contributions from the international community. That's absolutely key. And we as World Bank, not just, we are a contributor to this financing, but also we are very much on the side of Lebanon to make its case to the international community that it needs more financing and that it needs grant financing first and foremost, and that any kind of loans or concession loans should be last resort. But where we haven't really, the nut that hasn't been cracked is on the job side. I think that's really the how would you take on this challenge? Would the refugees stay on forever just taking cash assistance? Is that the way to go? Isn't it better that they get on their feet? But of course, this may have a trade-off with Lebanese nationals. Ultimately, the solution is by creating jobs for everyone, having a growing economy. So it takes us back to really the fundamental issue of how to get growth back to Lebanon, which brings us into a very large reform agenda, some of which was in Cedr in the CIP documents, but some of it was not. I think this has to, in a way, the approach is that we want to bring growth to the economy so that there can be, much higher job creation for everyone, and certainly be mindful of this issue of competition or displacement, if you will, between Lebanese and non-Lebanese. I don't think anybody has an answer for this. What's happened in Lebanon and Jordan is first in many respects, and many countries are looking to see what Lebanon and Jordan are doing, what they are innovating. And my last word really is on this innovation thing. Observing the last 7 years, there's been a sea change in the country, not just obviously with the refugees and that, but also with what's come in as technology and knowledge from the international community, the international humanitarian community, and I would really pay respect to my colleagues on that. They brought in a lot of interesting technology and innovations in providing services. They were not here, and now they're here in Lebanon, being applied to refugees. Iris scanning, ATM cards, what have you. And what it would be really important is to try to see how some of this advancement can also be brought into the national systems for Lebanon, so that one day when the refugees are back home, the humanitarian community has also gone back home, there's really something left behind that has built the systems of the country. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanin. Emmanuel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First, I want to thank you warmly, Ramzi, for your solidarity earlier. It's much appreciated. Just want to say that my boss, Mireille Girard, the UNHCR representative, could not come because she had to attend a meeting with the Prime Minister in relation to the story that is in the media. I want to thank the whole team for inviting us and organizing this event today. I knew only yesterday I had to fill in for Mimi. And I must confess I had not read the book, so I had to read the book quickly. So this was a good opportunity for me to say how well the book is structured. For someone who doesn't have much time, I appreciated very much, well, the fact that it's very well structured, very simple, clear, but also at the beginning of each chapter you have this summary of the chapter, which gives you basically the essence of what issues that are being discussed and presented. So you did a great job. I'm impressed because I know that often in the humanitarian world, numbers are like des étoiles filantes, they change all the time, they fall, and it's very, very difficult to get trends and to get, it brings us to the issue of the figures, the refugee figures. It's not the only situation where we have that problem everywhere. Refugees, and I want to also echo your comments about the early days. It's always the same thing. It's always the same thing. When refugees are coming for the first time, people believe they're going to be in for a few months, few weeks, or at worst a year, you know. And then you end up, in some cases, 15, 18 years later, the refugees are still around. Not having experienced that myself, but having read that, you know, the same happened in 1948 when the Palestinians arrived. They were all set to stay 3 weeks and go back, and we know how it is now. And it's not only proper, I mean, everywhere in Africa, in the rest of Asia, in Latin America, all the situations that I've been facing, the Afghan and Pakistan, tragic situations where you have protracted situation, people who come on a temporary basis are generously received, open-armed. The host country is even giving its own resources, but after a while, you know, there's so much you can give, and it is creating a whole lot of problems. That's why the issue of refugees should not be an issue left with countries that are affected. It is an international issue, and this is what is at stake. I mean, it's not a UNHCR issue. In the case of the Syrian refugees, it's not a Lebanese issue. It is an international issue, and means that it has to, you know, it's our job to mobilize this solidarity, mobilizing resources, but mobilizing attention, mobilizing also political will to find solutions, because ultimately, the best solutions for refugees, and this is what is happening, in fact, is returning back home. Over, you know, all the refugees, unless you give them citizenship, and, you know, but even there, the Lebanese who went to Canada, where I happen to come from, or the States or other places, have acquired citizenship, are coming back to Lebanon. They may permanently or on visit only. They keep a foot in the two countries. But refugees return back home because it's something very deep inside them. And so we're quite confident that the Syrian refugees will return. The only problem is when. That's the big problem. And there's no one that can tell. It can be a process that starts, and it can be a process that expands over several years, even decades. We've seen it. I mean, the Afghan refugees in Pakistan were over 6 million back in 2001, 2002, when we started the return in March 2002. It's still going on. There are about 2 point something left. So we've returned 3 to 4 million. It's huge. But you still have 2 point something left in Pakistan, and it's still, yeah. So, and it's been going on since 2002. We're talking about 16 years of a process of 16 years. You have other situation in Mozambique where refugees returned extremely quickly in 1992 because the circumstances were different. So there is no template, there's no model. You have to take it as it comes, trying to use all available means to try to anticipate, to predict. Planning is absolutely essential, and we are, and it's another reason for me to be very happy to welcome this publication, because it's the first that I know. I know AUB published a little what they call 101, but the intent was very different, was to put facts, and there's not much analysis. It's not the same purpose at all. But here you're giving a lot of also narrative about the early days of the crisis, and it's extremely important to document this, because it's amazing how we forget things. And it's not only numbers, there are a lot of data there that are very useful, but it's also the narrative. And I can say that, I'm amazed, because I'm surprised how well informed you are. As if you were able to get access to a lot of reports and some that are internal also, not confidential, but we don't share everything. And it's pretty accurate to as to what happened exactly. We're probably dealing with one of the most complex crises. It's Lebanon, of course, but it's also Jordan, it's Egypt, it's Iraq, and it's Turkey. Not to mention Syria itself, where you have, I think, over 7 million people who are internally displaced. So they're like refugees, but inside their own country, if you wish. And in many sense, it's not very different. I mean, in terms of the feeling you have of being out of your house, disconnected from your community. Okay, you're in your country, but again, it depends the situation. You're destitute, you're in camps, or you're living with in very precarious conditions. So it is probably. I mean, it's been said already, but the most important, the most complex crisis, refugee crisis since the Second World War. Now, you know, I think we're entering the 8th year, actually, of the crisis. What are the challenges ahead? I mean, many. I mean, I think remarkable things have been done, and I'm happy to see that they are documented, but as always, it's not enough. It's far from being enough. But the fact that you have the World Bank and UNHCR sitting on the same panel is not something that you see everywhere. It's two different worlds, the world of development and the world of humanitarian. And we realize, and it's not just Hani and myself, it's up to the top, that we need to reform our approach to refugee crisis in general. Lebanon has taught us that, you know, I mean, a lot of people abroad are just, I mean, can't even understand how come Lebanon was able to sustain such a crisis. It's remarkable. I mean, it's not completely new. A lot of people knew the Lebanese are very resilient by nature, but to that extent, it's, as a country, it's quite remarkable. But then, you know, it's not enough to say that. You need to bring this international solidarity to play a role. The challenge we're facing, in essence, is that we don't know when the refugees will return. They could be around for another 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, God forbid. But some may start returning, but you would still have a critical mass here for some time. So even if return was to start, it would be a process which can take time. And you would still have a critical mass of people here, and the burden and the pressure on the social services, on the economy, on the country would still be there. So how to echo what Hanin was saying is to be innovative, to be able to create mechanisms where we are able to go beyond humanitarian funding, getting development funding, which are by nature multi-year, which are more predictable, and try to set up activities that have a double impact, I would say, first and foremost on Lebanon itself, on the people in Lebanon, but also on the refugees. And so that whatever we spend is not spent just for temporary impact, but something that could leave a positive impact for the country and helps a country like Lebanon benefit in the end from something that has been perceived and was for quite a period a burden, but can be turned into a positive story in the end, something that would help Lebanon to go ahead and progress. I will stop here. I don't want to talk too long.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe Gilbert wants to make an intervention now. Please. Thank you.
Thank you for the invite as well. I'm impressed as well, as Emmanuel said. How did you convince the different stakeholders to give you content? That's impressive. Because I don't agree, it's very difficult to have access to different studies, so that's impressive. I join Hanin. I think the mitigation component seems a little bit a reflection of the quality of mitigations that exist in the Lebanese government and international agencies. I'm going to be the unpopular guy on the stage. I'm going to allow myself to challenge certain things. Because the mitigation seems like very piecemeal, as if I'm a business owner, the market is falling apart, institutionally I'm in trouble, I have no cash flow, but I want to change the ACs, or probably paint the desks. So the mitigation measures seem a little bit what exists, and I think this is the problem. I agree that the facts and figures are very needed for the country to be able to manage a crisis. At the same time, this is, I think, where our biggest problem lies, and I would suggest the next panel to be on probably how do we go from there. Yes, we are in a crisis. There is no doubt about this, and we're not the first country that goes through a crisis. The crisis now is because of Syrian refugees and Syrian crisis. It could be maybe from climate change, or it could be from an instability in the Gulf, and we have 400,000 families coming to Lebanon. What do we do? What it shows, I think the Syrian crisis proved that we're not as resilient as we would like it to be. We've been talking about Lebanon resilience for the last 10, 15 years. It shows that, a small crisis can shake up the whole economic model. And all our speculations, I see some economists in the room, all speculations were the economic model is not sustainable. 30,000 graduates a year, our economy wasn't able to absorb. Yes, we cannot absorb another 400,000, but this is nothing new. Our public debt has been increasing, and we know this, and we haven't been able to cater for this. Our economic problems are not new. Yes, there are implications. I'm afraid, even if I want to challenge certain numbers, as if we found our shamia. We found something to say, you know, all our problems come from there. Yes, I'm sure that we're short of $9 billion. At the same time, if we speculate on how this country was going pre-2011, I don't think it's very surprising. Probably we're in a deeper problem, not to use another term, but we were still in a problem. If we look at the numbers during then, so unemployment, public debt, electricity. The electricity, yes, we increased a little bit of consumption, but our electricity has been costing us $2 billion for the last few years. It's nothing new. Going into, so yes, there is a crisis. So probably my first question is, how do we develop an anti-fragile system? That's the question, because we're extremely fragile, and the crisis speed up our failure. It shows that we were covering up our problems, social, economic, and political. How do we become adaptable? The world is transforming with technology, but also is transforming with migration all over the world, population growth, demographics. What do we do about that? How are we adaptable in a world? So if it wasn't this crisis, it might be another crisis very soon. My third question is, how do we use this data to innovate? I want to go with another component. So what I would like to reflect on is, how can we create a model and how can we convince the Lebanese government to ensure political will, المجلس الاقتصادي الاجتماعي, to have conversations about the post-crisis, irrespective if the refugees will stay in Lebanon or not. How many of you, raise your hands, how many of you have started from now trying to penetrate the Syrian market? Raise your hands. Only? Are you sure? The rest, you're super late. Because already a lot of investments are starting to explore, a lot of businesses. We're all going there very soon, by the way. Irrespective if the refugees are staying in Lebanon or not. How are we capitalized on the Gulf being less of an opportunity and Syria becoming a greater opportunity? How are we capitalizing on the refugees in Lebanon, first to have higher opportunity in Syria, irrespective if they're coming back or not? And if the Lebanese market, the Lebanese businesses will not have this opportunity and the Gulf is closing, this is where we're going to die. Second, how are we going to develop our infrastructure in the borders? You know how many waste management plants are in the regions and are not functioning? You know how many water supply and water treatment plants that are not functioning? You know how many agricultural roads that we created and we never finished, or pipelines that we never finished, that were done by development agencies? How are we going to capitalize on this so that we develop the most developed infrastructure in our borders, so that we will be the first frontier for Syria development in the future? What Turkey is doing, what Jordan is doing. We're still figuring out how we're going to improve the air condition or paint the desk. We're still there. So how are we going to develop our infrastructure? Second, how are we going to leverage our community assets with Syrian refugees, especially they're low-skilled and mainly we have higher skilled population? How are we going to match this to create some anti-fragility for the borders and get ready for the post-crisis, irrespective of what's going to happen with the refugees, for the Lebanese economy and for the Lebanese businesses? So I think we're just putting our head in, so and we're just like, yes, we've been impacted. And I think the numbers, I think it's less than 9 billion. If we take off 2 years without a president and a couple of years without a prime minister, the security incidents that happened internally, probably the implications of the Syrian crisis could be cut in half. I think this is the real conversation. How we become anti-fragile, adaptable, and innovative. How develop a master plan for our infrastructure. How will be the first entrance to the Syrian market and capitalize on Syrian refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. We will ask Nassim Talib for some ideas for being anti-fragile. 2 points well taken by Haneen and Gilbert on the need for more expanded and well thought of mitigation factors and treatment. Our mandate was just that we put on ourselves, because this study, it is something that we initiated, we funded, and we read. This is just a collection of what others have thought of. This is not the result of our own exercise. But thank you for the comments. They're well taken, and I agree with them. So now we have this book, we have this study that synthesizes a lot of stuff. What are we going to do about it? What is the Economic and Social Council, for example, can benefit from such a study? And how is the Economic and Social Council is thinking of dealing with this impact, especially that, as Gilbert said, a lot of these problems have not started with the Syrian crisis, but have been a continuation of the Syrian crisis. The Social and Economic Council, which, although has been created more than a decade ago, has just entered the scene as a player. So you are a new player. Are you going to be able to change the equation? And how? In respect to our topic, of course.
It's a big question. Change the equation, I don't know. But be a serious influent circle, I think yes. But to do that, we need definitely these kinds of surveys and studies. That's why the book is very interesting for us, and we will definitely build on it. But one of the major things we're doing actually in the council, we're working on two different levels. First, internally, we're developing our economic observatory. Second, we're building a unit for impact assessment, economic impact assessment on all the decisions, so we'll be able to give the government serious thoughts and answers, because we've been asking two main questions to the government so far. The third level is statistics and figures, where we're doing a kind of data bank, and that's why this kind of work is important for us. On the second level, we're developing a social debate, because as I've said in my earlier intervention, the social aspect of our work is very important. We're working on the social pact, a new pact that we need to do between the unions, the private sector, the ILO, and we have a good initiative with them on that. A third initiative we're developing also is an economic roundtable with parties, which we invited parties to participate and to take serious talks about the actual situation and the future of the economy, because without the parties we cannot do a lot. They are monitoring definitely the government, and this is something that we started yesterday, and we had, I can say that we have very good people representing the parties. I even said and wrote yesterday that this is a dream team, because we have serious people, and parties are actually, economic parties are deeply concerned with what's happening, and this is something that I'm feeling for the first time in Lebanon. Unfortunately, we had to get to this low level of economic situation to have the parties reacting, but at least now they are. We're coming with a new parliament, a new government is coming on, so I think it's a good start for Lebanon. And you've asked how come the Lebanon can survive. This is incredible, Lebanon. These are Lebanese, because we have the economic Lebanon and we have the Lebanese, and this is, I think, the big added value that we still have, because most of us are still believing in the country. This might look as poetry, but at the end we need this kind of attitude, definitely vision, political vision, that we still need in the country Everybody's talking about this new vision. We have to write it down. We have to decide. We have to agree among this vision. Is it the direction that we want to go in the coming 5 or 10 years? Everyone describes the situation. But now we're going in the Social and Economic Council with a different approach that we call very simply a to-do list. In each and every problem we're doing, this is the thing that we propose and we agreed upon. Don't forget, Ramzi, that the Council by itself, ECOSOC, is a consensual system and body. So we have to agree among all players, among all stakeholders on the decision and the ideas that we're going through. So this is the first step. And we've been here for 4 months. And I think it's moving a lot. And I was happy to receive you last time. And I hope that we're going to do with you, with your institution, with the World Bank, with all the donors, with all our friends. The European community is helping a lot. So give us some time, and I think we will show at least a new approach, a new way of dealing with these things.
Thank you. Haneen, in her comments, has said that we need to prioritize some of the factors. I'm going to ask you, Haneen and Emmanuel, each one of you, to pick one high priority that is beyond the obvious, which is electricity, etc. One priority which is specific to the Syrian refugee issue, not an amplification of an existing problem, if you can find one. If not, then pick another one, but it is not electricity because this is very obvious.
Education would be my pick. You don't want a lost generation, neither of Syrian children. Neither Lebanon wants them, nor Syria, nor the region, nor the world. And we know that if you don't invest in the human capital today, you've lost it. You can't catch up. It's very hard to catch up. So the numbers, in fact, of about 430,000 school-age Syrian children is already outdated. The most recent number is that today in Lebanon, between the age of 3 and 18, there are about 640,000 Syrian school-age children. So, and there's about maybe, if you count a few that are in private schools, maybe we're at 280,000, 290 that are in. So the challenge is
Okay, your turn.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to be in the same vein, which is the social services. The other one is health. I mean, I'm very worried because we are, as simply as that, we are covering, just to give you a concrete example, all what is secondary, tertiary. Jennifer, you alluded to that. We cover 75 up to 90% of the bills, hospital bills of refugees who are going either to private or public hospitals. We have a network of hospitals with whom we have a contract, etc. Now, this means we need to mobilize yearly over $50 million to pay that. And the package is just a basic one. And we don't cover cover chronic disease, cancer treatment, etc. Unfortunately, it's life-saving interventions and it's deliveries for women. If we're not able to, and we've been able to do that for the past 7 years, but we're reaching a point where this is a protracted situation, and humanitarian funds are, by definition, funds that will go for emergencies. And we're not dealing any longer with an emergency. We're dealing with a protracted situation, which doesn't mean there is no needs. There are huge needs, but they are no longer the needs they used to be, where you had to act and move very quickly. Now we have put together services that amounts to government services, except that they're paid by the international community. Why? Because government of Lebanon has said no integration, and this is something that has been accepted. It's not possible for Lebanon to integrate, as Jordan has done it, for instance. So it has to be funded by the international. How do we put in place a system of funding which is predictable, which will happen at least for the next coming years, 3, 5... It's not me. and which would basically ensure that we don't get a worse situation we have. It is already difficult right now, but if we remove the support that has been granted, even insufficient, it would be even worse. You would have, you were talking about deficit because the refugees have problem paying the 25% remaining. Imagine if they didn't have the 75% covered, for instance. So these are questions not to you, it's more to the donor community, to people also not Hanin directly, but and we are actually discussing and sharing our own expertise and trying to be innovative with this, because it is a key issue, and it's not it's something that will happen. It's just a matter of time. So we need to be ready for that. Yeah, that's what I would have to say.
Gilbert, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Okay, we're asking the government to do things. The World Bank is doing things. The UN organizations are doing things. What's the rest of us are doing, and what can we do to mitigate the economic impact of the Syrian crisis on Lebanon? Because this is a part that the book really didn't go into.
One probably is invite policymakers to a conversation about what are the values and principles that govern our policies. لأن السوريين بينوا لنا عوراتنا. Do we consider Syrian refugees as human beings or just another whatever they want to finish with? Because I feel the experience of Syrian refugees has proved that the principles and values that govern our policies have nothing to do with how humane we are. And I'm not talking about people, because I think if there is someone who deserves a Nobel Peace Prize are Lebanese on the borders, because they've been so good hosts for the last 7 years with little support. At the same time, sometimes in our politicians' discourse and some of the policies that are on the table, no respect of human rights, not only for Syrian refugees, for Lebanese as well. So I think somewhere we need to reconsider the relationship of our state with the human beings in this country, and how much do we give value to human beings irrespective of diversity. A second thing probably that we can do together, for another conversation, is that policy making is about finding solutions, not only defining problems. In probably every panel we're at, I was hoping Nadim Mullah will be on the panel, because probably he would be nagging equally.
We invited him, but
I know.
He wasn't able to commit.
Nadim Mullah, the Prime Minister's office. Because it's interesting that in this country, policymakers, when they're discussing, they discuss problems the way we do. They do not put anything on the table. And policymaking is about finding creative solutions. And that's my invitation for the Council as well. لأنه this is a beautiful place. For example, in Europe, the Economic and Social Council, that's the place to produce new ideas, new solutions, where there is consensus about human rights, about protection, about social development. And they're beautiful places. I hope Lebanon will have the same chance. So collaborate with such institutions. And the last thing I would like to suggest as well, so we've heard two numbers. 70% of Syrians are under poverty, right? 30% of the Lebanese. And there is another number, which is 0.5% of the Lebanese own 55% of the wealth. 5 Lebanese have equally the total public revenue of Lebanon. There are 5 Lebanese who have in banks $12 billion.
But from Lebanon?
Irrespective. I'm stating a fact. No, to add it to this.
No,
to this
they just happen to be Lebanese, but this money was not acquired internally. But go ahead.
I'm just saying that inequalities in Lebanon are extremely high.
Of course.
So maybe another conversation to make. How are we going to reduce inequalities in a country where there is 30% very poor, 70% of Syrians are in extreme poverty, and there is a percentage that, so what can we do about this? I'm not saying that we're going to go into leftist discourse. I'm just saying these are numbers that we need to take into consideration our solutions for the country. Thank you.
Okay. So now we have 2 nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize. Donald Trump and the host communities on the Syrian borders. Any questions? Dr. Iskandar and then the lady here.
Thank you. I have very brief comments for Jennifer and for the gentleman who is in the same business that I am in, and for Haneen, but she will not answer me. Jennifer, for one thing, you have missed on the most important study about the Syrian economy and its degraded situation over the years, which was done by ESQA. ESQA devoted 140 people to study under Dardari the consequences, and it has ended by indicating to us that the Syrian GDP fell between 2010 and today from 60 billion to 15 billion, which means it gives us a lesson where we can go. As to Gilbert and asking or telling us to be aware, he should be aware that the Lebanese are more aware than he is aware. In 2013 and 2014, if you were to look at our balance of payments figures, you would be told that we had deficits of 1.6 billion and 2 billion. But if you looked at the figure for imports of oil products, they had gone up from 4 million tons to 8.8 million tons. I told the World Bank that the difference was exported to Syria, was paid for in cash, and really we had a balance of payments surplus. So the opportunities in Syria are not absent. Most important, the students that are studying here, and this is a tremendous gift by the Lebanese public sector and the private sector. You have about 20,000 Syrian students from well-to-do families, from business families, whose families have established themselves here, who want to work with the Lebanese, who are going to work with the Lebanese, and their children are going to take with them a higher level of education than they could have had there. Finally, I wish to address my dear friend Haneen by one simple question. No matter what, in the post-period that Gilbert is referring to, we need to have a more effective governance in Lebanon and more integrity in handling public issues and public projects. Do you think we are going to have it so that we get our 4 billion from your side?
Okay, at least we have a question at the end of this. You want to answer it, or you want to have the prophecy being fulfilled that you will not answer it?
Well, we hope so, Dr. Skandar. But, you know, in the run-up to SED, we really put a lot of effort on ensuring that there's a credible reform program included, and in fact published our own assessment of the CIP, which was also made public at the event. And the World Bank is very committed to push on the reforms. Energy, of course, is a key one, but it's not just energy. It's public sector reform, it's governance, it's corruption, and then various sectors. So all I can say is that now, of course, once the new government is formed, we already have these little reform notes prepared, which we will engage with them very quickly, but not only with the government. I think we definitely want to engage with ECOSOC, and I'm really honored actually to be on the same panel, and with other parties, independents like yourself, thinkers. So yes, inshallah.
Hello. First of all, I do work on freelance basis with UNHCR as interpreter, the liaison with the refugees. And I do appreciate a lot, since 3 years almost, what UNHCR is doing in Lebanon and abroad. And I think, almost I'm sure that the Lebanese government isn't aware what does it mean integration comparing to the other countries when they take the refugees. What does UNHCR do? My question to several. First of all, I will start with Mr. Emmanuel. Do you have statistics how many Lebanese more or less work with UNHCR? Because there was a program on MTV before coming. I guess he was the counselor of Mr. Basil. And the journalist was asking him if UNHCR will close. He said, yes, so what? Let them close and the government will do their job. I don't know if the Lebanese government is ready or can do like 50% of their job or less. My second question is to Mr. Arbid. Mr. Arbid, do you have statistics how many rich Syrian businessmen open business in Lebanon? I strongly suggest if you can send a small equipe of people to make a statistic for Marilies Street, business commercial street, how many businessmen Syrian open and make big investment like maybe $500,000, $1 million and hire Syrian. Do you think that they will leave Lebanon if they make all this investment within 2 or 3 years? And only the third.
Two questions, but you mean business people, right? Businessmen and women.
Business Syrian in underwear, in curtains,
men and women,
in tailors. All Marilies are Syrian. I'm not against, but I wonder why the Lebanese open after 6-7 months, they close and the shop is for rent. They lose money.
We got the question.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Emmanuel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. Thank you for your question. I don't have the exact statistics in my mind, but I know that it's probably over 400 Lebanese are working for us as national staff. We have in Lebanon over 600 staff, and we must be in the range of 450 Lebanese staff. I would need to check that, but it's certainly not lower than that. I'm not giving you a high figure. But it's not only that, it's also we work with partners, with NGOs, and in the early days we were, of course, working mainly with international NGOs, and with time we've changed that trend. I think now we're talking about 70% of what we call our partners to whom we transfer funding also to implement specific range of activities are national NGOs or Lebanese NGOs. So it's not only staff, it's also the civil society, which is part of our mandate also, is to reinforce capacity on the ground. Now, of course, we are not a development agency, but we are also, as a matter of fact, I was going to say we're not supporting it, but we are, because I think the figure is that since 2011, we've spent, and I'm doing some promotion now that I'm being given the opportunity. I think we spent over $120 million in two things. One, supporting the capacity of the government. So that means, concretely speaking, salaries for certain ministries to be able to hire additional resources to deal with the refugee issue. And second, included in that are what we call these community support projects, which are basically small projects, can be water project, can be waste management project at the municipal level. So these are projects that are, in a sense, benefiting for the community. They're not targeting refugees. They're targeting, of course, it's areas where you have refugees. So in the end, it's the two communities are being, but these are community projects, so they belong to the municipality. I stop here.
Okay, Mr. Arbid.
Answering your question, in fact, we don't have real figures, but I can tell you that there's a serious issue on that. We know that there is a competition among Syrians and others, but don't forget that we are also in a free economy, and don't forget that we are working to tell people to come and invest in Lebanon. Having said that this should be done under Lebanese laws in a transparent way. These people should pay their taxes as any Lebanese, not to have unfair competition. Now, if there are Syrians or others, this is not an issue for us. It might be a good. Lebanon is a land of opportunity if you know where to invest. Now, why some Lebanese companies are closing down? Because we have a serious issue in consumption by itself. Retail decreased in the past 5 years for more than 30%. And retail in Lebanon affects more than 70% of our GDP. So this is something that we have to look at. we have to see if these Syrian are legal, official, declared, and if this is the case, they are welcome to do business in Lebanon, and we want to see Syrian and other community doing business. But if it's not the case, this is illegal, this is unfair competition with Lebanese, and definitely the government should take necessary action to stop the activity.
Last question, Dr. Fahad, and then I'll conclude with one more question, and then you'll be free to stay or go. Dr. Fahad. ما في فيلم سينما إذا
Actually, my comment before the lady asked question is, why didn't the book include, a section on the investment of Syrians in the Lebanese economy, in manufacturing and trade, in all sectors, and what impact would have that on the economy? I mean, what positive impact? But my question is to Haneen about the first employment program that the World Bank had started with the Ministry of Labor, and that has not been implemented. Why did that happen? And don't you think that if we have expanded this program, to maybe push it beyond the 3,000 number that was targeted, wouldn't it have created a good momentum for Lebanese companies to employ more Lebanese and maybe shunt some of the illegal Syrian employment that we are seeing, especially in hospitality and in retail?
So thank you, Nabil, for asking this question, actually, because Nabil is referring to a program called First-Time Job Seekers that we had started and designed and financed, and everything was ready about 4 years ago now. But unfortunately didn't get implemented because of, in cabinet, certain decrees didn't get passed in time. So it got canceled. It was a small pilot. However, we've actually now brought it back. So just 2 weeks ago, we've concluded the negotiations for bringing that program, as well as another larger operation, actually, called the National Jobs Program, about $400 million, which is going to look at the demand and supply side. So this First-Time Job Seekers program is now back, and actually we have even a slightly better design, and we'll be pushing it, but as well as Entrepreneurship Fund and an SME Matching Grant Fund. If all goes well and the government comes in place and they, goes through speedy approvals, we hope by January 1 the programs will be effective. But basically, the bottom line is absolutely agree. These are programs to create jobs for Lebanese. That's what the objective is. Yeah.
Okay, just to add one thing on that. As you know, Dr. Fahad, in the council we voted an opinion. This was our first opinion to the government, and that they included it in the budget law of giving incentives to Lebanese companies for the first job, and these incentives were among the social security, and so this is something that they took partially from the council. So this was one of the first steps we did, and we have to build on that. So maybe this program also will help us in promoting this kind of incentives.
It's true that what you would have liked to see in the book, which is the amount of investment by Syrians in Lebanon, is not included in the book because there is no such study that has ever been done, and our book was a compendium of studies that were already done, and if the Chamber of Commerce would like to commission us to undertake the study, we'd be more than happy to execute it for you. The last question. We noticed that in most countries that experience a large influx of people, whether migrants or refugees or any other form, is followed by unusual growth in their economies. And whether it is new territories like the Americas or Australia, New Zealand, boomed after people migrated to it, or established economies like Germany, France, etc., who have taken in a lot of people from outside their countries. We've seen the migrants have contributed a lot to the growth of their economies. Something that until now we have been oblivious to in our country, and fear of sectarian destabilization has blinded us from opportunities. The Syrian refugees are here in the short and medium term, and as Emmanuel said, even if they start to leave tomorrow, this is a long process. My question to all of you: how can we benefit from having such a large number of refugees, besides begging aid from the outside? How can we benefit as a country, and in turn benefit them in creating common opportunities? What mechanisms can we use to channel that? Any thoughts that we may have in that? And who would like to answer this question? Okay, Manuel.
I'll give it a try. Counting on my colleagues to compliment. No, I think, you know, what happens, well, first, the situation of Lebanon is quite special. I mean, I would not compare Lebanon to Germany or United States or Canada, where you had large flows of population, either migrants or refugees, depending on the times, and these people were welcome to stay, integrated, and contributed to the growth of the country. Some people even say that Angela Merkel in 2015, you know, was willingly inviting the refugees, the migrants who were walking inside Europe, to settle in Germany because there were some labor needs, etc. I don't know if this is not official, but anyway, that was at the time, I remember. But the situation of Lebanon is quite special because the Syrians, I mean, have always been here as migrant workers, basically. Except they would come here without their families. In a sense, the tented settlements you have were there already in much lower number, of course. So I think this relationship will continue. I think what the crisis is doing on Lebanon is that it's revealing problems that existed before that are not unknown to the Lebanese. What happens is that it forces the country to at least start addressing them, because the situation is unbearable, and you cannot, you know, when the problem is so big in front of you, you cannot continue hiding. You need to address it. This, plus also the fact that, you know, there is an opportunity, there is a tension on Lebanon. I mean, I know we never get enough attention in general, both individuals and countries, but you know, just this year, for instance, out of these 3 international conferences, 2 were exclusively dedicated to Lebanon, okay, which is, you know, quite unusual. But in terms of resources, and there are more that could be brought. So I think there is an opportunity for Lebanon to combine these different factors and turn it, as I was saying, into a positive story, in a sense, for the country. Trying to, I mean, establishing, for instance, a social system in Lebanon, which has started being implemented in the 70s, was interrupted, and, you know, is there without being there. And PTP that the World Bank has launched as an example, for instance, but it has to go further. How to use, you know, international resources, attention, expertise on the ground, but also mobilization of the civil society, of business society, you know, everybody basically in Lebanon, to try to address certain, you know, problems that have been around, you know, for decades, actually. They're known to everybody. It's just that somehow, and that's where you would need to explain to me outside this panel, is how come you've never managed to really crunch these problems? I have elements of answer to that question, but anyway, that's the way I would see it. How to use this crisis as a vector, as a you know, to move, you know, on certain issues, not on everything. No country is perfect, but on certain key issues, bring Lebanese together and give yourself certain basic institutions, social institutions that can that help at least the poorest in Lebanon. And I'm stopping there. There are other things to say, but my colleagues will talk about the economy. Or
That's $1 million question, in fact. But I maybe can't answer it, but I can put some words on that. I think one of the good things is to draw lessons from this crisis. And the lesson should be, how are we going to deal with our neighbors now that a good part of them is here, but after they go back home? Because we Lebanese also, we live in this situation. We know what means being displaced, what means being refugees. And I hope that we got the lessons we need on that. I think that Syria has a great future, and this is normal. After each war or crisis, there is a good period coming in. But I think the best thing we should do now is to take the international support, not as some of the donors here, but I think the best thing now is to help the Syrian to go back home in a safe and decent way. This is the only big chapter that I would like to conclude on that.
There was one study that we came across that looked at what's the experience with long-term benefits of refugees. When does this big burden or cost turn positive, if it does? In Australia, they've done this long-term study. And it's actually one of the few. There aren't that many, and this is interesting, that there aren't that many that look at when on this benefit. But it takes time. It takes at least 10 years for that stay of a refugee become a positive thing for the economy, for the country. And that's with a lot of very deliberate policies and programs, and Australia opened up their job market and so on and so forth. All the things that are very difficult to do in Lebanon because the economy is not growing and so on and so forth. This is, I'm just saying this to put this a little bit in perspective, that it is a big challenge, and it is amazing that Lebanon nevertheless has risen to that occasion. I think this really must be said. To me, as I mentioned a little before, I think most important area where Lebanon can benefit is to build its national systems, its institutions in education, in health, in electricity, in water, in Ministry of Labor, to learn, for example, how the world does cash transfers. There's so many advancements, and now it's being done for refugees, but the Lebanese don't have any of that. Same for education. There's technologies being implemented for refugees, or why not for Lebanon? So transfer that into the national system. This would be the best benefit that Lebanon can get out of this whole experience in the end. Finally, I just want to say, we've seen so many nice experiences in the schools between the children, the Lebanese and the Syrians. And these Syrian kids, one day when they go back to Syria, they're going to be forever indebted to Lebanon. They're going to say, "Ana ta'allamtu bi Lebanon," and they're going, and this is the gift that Lebanon has given them. I look at it like this: you're giving a gift to a population which will never forget. Plus, they will all have Lebanese accents as well.
There are a few experiences that might be scaled up. We've been inspired by some international practices, and we've been collaborating with some development agencies. Because one of the things we're trying to do, use the problems in localities, infrastructure, water, education, health, to develop local ecosystems for innovation and entrepreneurship. So working with unions of municipalities, with the host communities, but also engaging other stakeholders that are on a national level, but go on the local level and build local capacity to solve the problems. My colleagues can help me, maybe around 40 municipalities we're doing this with. We're also piloting another project with local universities, so the smaller one. So also to develop labor market observatories using technology to follow skills and labor and what's happening in different areas, but also link them to vocational education institutions and try to develop as well local capacities, host communities, see refugees to do innovation, entrepreneurship, and supporting SMEs at the same time. So we're trying things in the region, and there are beautiful things happening. Probably what is needed is more of a policy framework that would allow those things to scale up. I hope the next governments will be looking at what could be possible in the regions particularly.
I'm going to give the last word to Jennifer to comment on everything that has been said or not said.
Basically, as Ramzi has indicated, our study was a compilation of a lot of different studies and that were out there. We did, of course, conduct our own simulations for some of the information due to lack of information. And as a result of this, of conducting the economic impact of the Syrian crisis publication, we've definitely discovered that there are gaps in information or studies that haven't been conducted, like Mr. Fahad was indicating, for example, that there are no studies that indicate how much investments wealthy Syrians are putting into the economy. Of course, there are also lack of information and studies about the actual impact on the labor market itself. And as we indicated, for example, there are bits and pieces of information which we had to utilize to come up with certain assessments, but there are no actual studies that state, or recent studies that indicate what is the actual impact, how are Syrian refugees actually impacting our labor market, in which sectors, and of course with regards to Syrian businesses opening in Lebanon, how many are there? The last study that was conducted, I think, was by the World Bank in 2014, and it wasn't a nationwide study, it was for several large cities. So there are gaps in information, and of course there is not only lack of information with regards to the Syrian businesses, how many are opening in Lebanon. There's also a gap in information regarding Lebanese businesses and how they have benefited actually from the Syrian crisis itself, because we've conducted a small exercise, Lebanon Opportunities actually conducted a small exercise to assess how businesses have benefited, and many have benefited from the Syrian crisis itself. This is also something that also needs to be developed on. So definitely with regards to mitigation measures, yes, we did compile the mitigation measures from different studies, because this is a compilation of a lot of sources, and of course we leave a lot of the information for what we consider to be the experts. So end of day, to come up with mitigation measures for each sector, we require expert opinion like yours for each and every economic sector. So these are, this is the gist of it.
Thank you, Jenny. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you for the panel who also have shared with us the cream of the thought on the topic. And until we meet again on another topic on another day, thank you very much. The whole thing has been filmed, and yes, and will be posted on our website. You'll all get an email on the link in case you would like to see it again or forward it to somebody. Thank you.